Welcome to your forum on local issues, problems, and solutions. This is Community Connection.
As we all know, San Diego County is wildfire country. Urban fires are fought by paid career fire departments. However, for those in the rural East County, CAL FIRE, the U.S. Forest Service, and 30 volunteer fire departments are there to serve residents. Those volunteer departments are our topic of discussion on Community Connection. I'm Mark Zegan. Those volunteer firefighters play a vital role in the East County, but funds to provide them with what they need to do their job can be limited. That's where the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation plays a vital role with financial grants to these organizations. From the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation, Chairman of the Board, Frank Ault, and Executive Director, Joan Jones. Well, you've been helping rural firefighters since 1989, and I guess, Frank, we'll let you go first here. Explain the mission of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation and the areas covered by volunteer departments.
Well, thank you, Mark, for having us here today. And clearly, we are really talking about something that is vital, not just for those communities in the East County where we have the volunteer departments, but really for the entire county. Clearly, when we had, for instance, the Cedar Fire 10 years ago or 6 years ago when we had the 4 different fires all at the same time, they started in these rural areas. And clearly, the way we can be most effective in protecting our citizenry in the cities is to stop those fires when they're small. And the County of San Diego, interestingly, in their county charter, does not have a responsibility to provide fire protection. And they had a contract for years with the California Department of Forestry, now CAL FIRE, but they ended that contract with budgetary issues back in the mid-1970s. And at that time, the volunteer department started popping up to take over in the rural areas. And the county provided some funding until after Prop 13 took place in the early 1980s. Then the volunteer departments were on their own. And it became apparent by the late 1980s that they needed help out with the volunteer departments. They really have the equipment to do the job. So that's when the Fire Foundation was formed. And it was really formed with the intent and mission, which still exists today, to improve the system of fire protection and medical emergency services throughout San Diego County, not just to the rural departments that we're really focusing on today.
Those in rural San Diego want to have the same amount of service anybody in urban San Diego would like to have, obviously.
Well, and what's interesting, too, is that 80% of the calls that all fire departments get in San Diego County, volunteers included, are medical calls. And yet the bulk of those medical calls in these rural areas are not from the citizens in that area. They are from people who live in the city of San Diego or any of the urbanized areas who are either traveling through the rural parts of the county or out there recreating, whether they're hiking up a Mount Laguna or going to the observatory, Mount Palomar, out to Borrego Springs for activities in the desert.
That's amazing. I'm surprised to hear that.
Well, it's interesting, and most people don't realize, because of the way our population is in the county of San Diego, that the bulk of the people live along the coastal areas, and that's where we have the paid career fire departments. But 60% of the county is protected by these 30 volunteer departments. And they're really in the north area and the east part of the county.
And that's 60% of the county.
That's 60% of the county from a land mass perspective, certainly not from a population. But these 30 departments run 6,000 calls a year. So that's, roughly 200 per station. Some are more like 100, some are at the 300 level. But about 1,000 of those are fires, and about 5,000 are medical. But these departments also serve as a resource in the local community, because in many of these communities, that's all there is the volunteer department. So if we always hear about the cat up the tree stuck, but if you got a rattlesnake on your front porch, you've got a tree down across your driveway or a public road, who's out there to help you? It's the volunteer firefighters.
We are talking about the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation and how they help San Diego's volunteer fire departments out in the East County. That's Frank Ault. He's chairman of the board. Joan Jones, the executive director of the foundation is here. By the way, their website, sdfirefoundation.org. There's a lot of information on that, and we'll go over that just a little bit later on. As we look at, as you handed me a map of the volunteer fire office departments, for example, I'll just pick one here I'm familiar with. I've seen it a lot. The Julian Cuyamaca Fire Station 57. For example, would this be staffed, how would this be staffed, let's say? How many people?
Well, when we started with the volunteer departments, they were mostly all live in the region volunteers who would be at home, the alarm would go off, they jump in their car, they go to their stations and respond. There's a lot of time lapse in there because a lot of the people in those rural areas don't happen to live right next to the station. We have progressed now to the point where almost all 30 of our volunteer fire departments are staffed 24 hours a day with either 2 or 3 volunteers working 24-hour shifts.
Yeah, so that's really something. I mean, think about that, Frank, because obviously they are, as we've said, volunteers. They're doing this because they want to help and serve the community, and it's not an easy job. It's really something.
Well, it's not only the time that they're spending at the station on duty. It is the amount of training that they need to acquire. Now, in all honesty, we've had a shift. In the early days, it was the local volunteer who lived in the community, and we still have a lot of those. But we are finding more and more young adults, both men and women, who want to become paid career firefighters. But they realize when there's an opening, say in the city of San Diego or Escondido, there is a tremendous number of applicants. How do they get the upper edge? They come out to a volunteer department for a couple of years, they get the training, they get the experience, and they are then more likely to get hired by a paid department.
That's a pretty smart idea. You're getting obviously some talented people there. Some are going to leave, of course, and move on, but the backcountry seemingly is in pretty good hands in these volunteer fire departments because they really want to be there.
Well, everybody is very, very dedicated to it. I think what is really the biggest issue for them is the limited dollars that they have. They get $30,000 a year from the county, and in a few cases they have a little bit of a tax base out there.
Yeah, I was going to ask how much tax money do you get? It can't be that much.
No, it really varies from station to station. Some get basically nothing. Some stations will get $20,000, $30,000. So putting that together, they may be working with a $50,000 to $60,000 budget. But when you look at fuel costs today, and these fire trucks, they fundamentally get, say, 4 miles to the gallon and cost you $4 a gallon. So it's costing you fundamentally $1 a mile to drive a fire truck. And so fuel is a big bill. And then after that, you've got insurance and utilities and everything else. So there's very little left for training and for equipment that they need. And some of the equipment that's becoming available today is fabulous from a technology point of view and what it can do. But a lot of things cost $10,000, $20,000 each. And a fire truck these days, $300,000 to $350,000.
So the yearly budget for these 30 fire stations in the East County, what would that be?
Well, you probably, in totality, if you look at it, they're going to be something $1.5 million to $2 million, which is roughly the cost to run one paid fire station in a metropolitan area when you look at the fact that they've got a crew of 4, you've got 3 shifts, that's 12, generally a 13th is for vacation reliefs, and you've got the cost of the station. We're doing out there roughly what one station will cost you in the city.
That's pretty amazing. So you need grants. I saw last year you picked up a grant late last year of $278,000. That came late last year, I believe, or within the year or so.
Well, what we did
that's pretty good. That's pretty good grant.
Yeah, we have done $4 million over the years, and in the early time, most of those grants were for things so basic as fire hose, tires for the fire engines. We have now progressed with our fundraising to the point where we bring in somewhere between $250,000 to $300,000 a year. We run a grant program where all the volunteer departments submit what their greatest needs are. We have a board that then assesses those needs and grants money out for as much as we can raise. Now, we did $278,000, as you said last year, Mark, but we had requests for over $600,000, and so we have a big shortfall out there.
How do you handle that? And before we I do want to remind you, this is Frank Ault. He is chairman of the board of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. Joan Jones is here. She is the executive director of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation, and we're talking about making sure the backcountry fire departments, the volunteer fire departments, have what they need. So how do you handle those shortfalls?
Clearly a lot of the departments go without things that they really need to have. But after the wildfires in 2007, the County of San Diego engaged an outside firm called Citygate to do a whole analysis of the fire service in the county, had a number of recommendations, and a couple of them were directed at ourselves. One was to do a whole needs assessment for all 30 stations over the next 5 years, so we really knew what they needed and could prioritize and use that for fundraising. And the other was to increase public awareness. And because the Fire Foundation's board is all volunteer, with this increased level of activity, we have brought on Joan Jones as our executive director. She's been involved with us doing strategic planning, and now actually in her new role as executive director last fall. But in total, she's been with us about 1 year, and what I really find amazing is how quickly she's picked up all of the things about the fire, and as an average citizen coming in, she now realizes how little the average population of the county really understands the fire system that we have today. So kind of like Joan to chat a little bit about some of the things that she's learned in her first year.
Yeah, Joan, tell us about what you have learned here since joining the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation.
Yes, well, as Frank was saying, I have been involved for about a year and consider myself to be an average urban citizen here in the San Diego area. And I'm one that has had very good experience with fire departments in the past. I've had a few emergencies in my life where I've had to dial 911, and I've had a very good response and very happy with the response from the departments. And so I've just thought that all of San Diego, you dial 911 and someone would be there to provide that same level of support no matter where you were. And so it's been very interesting to me to learn over the past year the work of what these volunteer departments do out in the rural backcountry, because these people are there on a volunteer basis. They get by with so little in terms of the budget that Frank was talking about, and they really need help to develop what they do to provide safety for the community. And what is impressive to me is the people out in the rural areas. Well, like if I'm out driving around, as Frank was saying, vacationing or recreating, as an urban person that lives in the city, and I have an accident or one of my family members gets sick, it's a volunteer. In most cases, it's going to be a volunteer that comes there to help me first. And that, to me, was amazing to find out, because when we're, as a normal citizen, when we're traveling around in San Diego, many of us go up to Julian or Borrego or Palomar or Mount Laguna to have fun and hike around, and we take our families. We love to go to these places.
Places like Julian are going to be crowded, and things are going to happen.
And things are going to happen. And when you think about, you just assume that people are going to be there to be able to help you. And what I've learned is that it's a volunteer that's going to be there to help you. And so these are people that we need to support in terms of the training so that they can provide the quality of care that we all expect, because it's very important. The quality of care that one gets when they first have an emergency determines your long-term recovery rate. And so what we're trying to do with the Regional Fire Foundation is be sure that these folks that are volunteers have money for training, that they have money to buy equipment, that they have what they need to perform these services for the county, for the citizens in the county.
We'll continue to talk about the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. That's Joan Jones, the executive director. Frank Ault is here. He's chairman of the board of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. We will continue our discussion on Community Connection right after this.
My name is Meera. Many families have come to America for a better life. I advocate for these families with United Way to make the community stronger. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Today
60 minutes of physical activity a day and eating well can help get your child healthy. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov. That's letsmove.gov. A message from USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
Why are you so distant?
Did you have to shoot anyone?
You gonna get a job now or what?
No one knows what it's like to come back from Iraq or Afghanistan unless they were there. Join other veterans at communityofveterans.org. Brought to you by Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and the Ad Council.
I'm Mark Zegan. Welcome back to Community Connection. Right now we are talking about the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation and how it helps residents and visitors of the East County, our backcountry, our mountainous areas, our desert areas. If you call a fire department, who comes to serve you? It's a volunteer fire person. If you're a tourist and you're coming to Julian and you have an issue, it's a volunteer that comes to help you. Some 30 volunteer fire stations out in the East County. The San Diego Regional Fire Foundation helps them out with money, with assistance, with training. And right now we're going back to Joan Jones, the executive director of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. Also here is Frank Ault. He is chairman of the board. Joan, as we took a break, you were continuing on what you've been doing for the Fire Foundation since you have arrived there.
Yes, and thank you, Mark. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the website that we have just launched this fall. It's sdfirefoundation.org. And we are using that as a tool to communicate to the public about fire and emergency services. And we have a section of that website called the Command Post. And we're using that to teach the public some basic information about fire emergencies, the fact that there are 3 different types of emergencies that fire department responds to, as Frank was talking about earlier: medical emergencies, fire emergencies, and emergencies within the community. We're also in the Command Post letting people know what volunteer firefighters and what firefighters in general do. Because as I was talking about earlier, I'm fairly new to this fire space, and people don't realize that the training that in the average day of what a firefighter goes through, the amount of time that they spend on training and physical fitness is really pretty amazing. And I've seen these guys in work and been to a couple of their training sessions. They really work hard to stay in shape, and the training that they do to be sure that they know all the latest techniques to help their when they're out on a call. So we have things like that on our website, and we want to continue to build on that as a way to make the public aware about fire and emergency services.
Joan Jones, the executive director of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. Let's step back to something you mentioned. You talked about training. How are the firefighters and responders trained? Who does the training? How long does it take? Because obviously they do a really good job, so they're trained by obviously pros.
Yeah, there's 400 volunteer firefighters in the county manning these 30 stations. And most of them come to the departments as EMT. So they generally go to a community college in fire science classes, and they do get their EMT certification. So they come with some degree of knowledge.
So they double as firefighters, EMTs.
Yes, they do both. Clearly, we don't in those rural areas have 2 separate groups, and so they come with that knowledge. They are expected to go to a fire academy. Some of them are provided by the junior colleges. Some are provided by, for instance, Heartland, which is the cities in the La Mesa, El Cajon area grouped together. They have a training facility. They have to pay to go there. It's about $3,000.
That was my next question. Do they have to pay for their training?
Yes.
Yes, they do. And now they're volunteer. They're working for free.
Well, this is where the big issue comes with the volunteers. To do the duty days at the station and to do all of their training, they're away from whatever their permanent work job is, so they're not getting paid. They're away from their families, and they are paying money out. And if they want to go on to paramedic school, which is becoming more and more necessary to be a paid career firefighter, depending where you go, that could be up to $10,000. It's just like going to college. You put your money into your future, but while you're doing it, you are struggling financially.
We could call this an apprenticeship.
Very much so. And, they do have training sessions every week at their local fire stations. All the chiefs have been around for a long time, very good instructors. And so they'll have training on rescue over the side type of things. If a vehicle goes off a cliff or something, they get training on that. So every week they do a different subject. Some train twice a week, some once a week. So training is continual because a lot of these skills that you learn, you don't end up using every day.
But at least they know. And
they know, and they are ready for it when it happens.
Yeah, they're ready to go in case something happens. So that's obviously, well, you can't, for somebody who needs that service, you can't put a price on it.
No, absolutely not. And as Joan mentioned earlier, with 80% of the calls being medical, and in some cases, it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes for an ambulance to get out to these rural areas. The firefighter is really the crucial difference between the patient having a survivable rate and the treatment they are able to get once they get to the hospital. If they are well treated at the scene, come into the hospital in great condition, relatively speaking, for whatever their ailment is, their chances of survival and quick recovery are far, far greater. But what the public really concentrates on more is the fire side, because a medical incident will generally just impact one or two people, and their, of course, immediate family is impacted. But a fire, such as we saw with Witch Creek and Cedar, they start small. They start in the rural areas, and they can burn into the urban areas. And potentially, we've seen it in Malibu, we've seen it in Orange County. They burn to the ocean. And in fact, in Cedar Fire, had the winds not shifted, they could easily gone through San Clemente Canyon down into La Jolla. But what really is impressive in San Diego and unique about San Diego is, first of all, you say we've got one county. We have 250 fire stations in the county. Now, that includes 11 on Camp Pendleton. So you got the military, you've got the Forest Service, you got CAL FIRE, and you have all the paid fire departments. But when a major fire breaks out, and you got 80-mile-an-hour winds, we have extremely dry fuel. We are in a semi area. We have very rough terrain. When you put all these factors together, the number of fire departments really isn't the crucial element. It really is how fast you can get to a fire before it gets out of control.
Things have changed a lot since both the Cedar and Witch fires. I guess Cedar now 10 years old almost, the Witch fire in 2007. There have been a lot of discussion, a lot of changes taking place in firefighting.
There definitely have been many improvements. We've consolidated now down to just 4 dispatch centers, so there's a lot better coordination in dispatching units. If a fire breaks out in a given location, if you're sending, say, 7 units, they're the closest 7 units, and it makes no difference which department you belong to. You go. And so we are trying to get as many resources there as quickly as we can. Now, we had a couple major fires last year, all in the rural area. The Vallecita's complex was over 20,000 acres, but lightning caused. And guess what? Lightning doesn't like to strike right along the edge of the road where you can get a fire truck to. It's maybe a mile or two from the nearest road. So sometimes on ground crews have to wait for the fire to get to them, or they got to hike into it. So air resources have become an extremely valuable asset in getting fires very quickly. And we've had a couple of helicopters. CAL FIRE's had 1 or 2 Bor 8 bombers. And we've now increased, the county has gotten some additional helicopters. SCG&E provides one during the peak seasons. But finally, for the first time this year, we've actually utilized military helicopters and planes in firefighting.
Didn't we try out one very special, if I recall, piece of equipment, airborne equipment, which came from Canada?
Yeah, it's called a super scooper.
Yeah.
And it's unique in the sense of the amount of water it can carry. A helicopter is limited, a Bor 8 bomber is limited. The super scooper could come in and pick up 2 to 3 times the water that you would have in a Bor 8 bomber.
We don't have that anymore, though. That was a trial.
No, we had it. We actually never ended up using it because we didn't have anything major that year. I mean, if you look at major fires, yes, we had one in 1970, then 2003, 2007. So there was a big gap on the front end. That's because we've gotten to the fires and we've gotten them very quickly. We had 6 this year that were over 1,000 acres, but they were all in very rural areas. And so now with the resources from the air, getting to them quickly when they're not near it, getting the ground crews there quicker, having the volunteer fire stations manned 24 hours a day and not having to come from the home, all of these elements have added to the responsiveness and the effectiveness of fighting fires.
We are talking with Frank Ault, chairman of the board of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation, Joan Jones, the executive director of the organization. We've been talking about various aspects of backcountry firefighting and emergency medical facilities, the EMTs, which of course are all the fire people, fire persons, firemen, firewomen, and are also volunteers. As the county grows, and more people are still living in the back country. A lot of people did leave Julian after the fires, so you lost a little tax base there. But still, more people do build out in the rural areas, and you're doing your best to serve those people out of those areas. Again, you're looking for grants. We've talked about this earlier. You need grant money, you need donations, you need whatever you can to help. And what can people do to help out?
Well, basically, the needs are still very high because you have two things happening. We have stations that don't have all the equipment that we need, and you could start with something in a place called Shelter Valley out past, basically between Julian and Borrego Springs, the desert area. They have 700 square miles that they cover and protect out there. They had 2 big brush fires out there this year, and they need a brush fire engine. A 4-wheel drive one that will take them across the sands. They have a great new structure engine, but it can't really be used other than to protect buildings. It cannot go out. And so but a brush engine like that's going to cost about $350,000. Now, the Fire Foundation has, in addition to all the small things we've done, we have bought 3 fire engines for departments, and we've bought 2 ambulances. But we have needs that are for existing equipment that gets used up. And people forget that when you have medical emergencies, they're using equipment every day. Some of that can be reused. Some of it is expended, has to get replaced. But technology is changing as well. We're looking at things called thermal imaging cameras now that you can go and look through smoke. You can find a child, say, in a burning house that's hiding under a bed. It can spot through the smoke any source of heat. You have a fire in your wall by your fireplace. Firefighters in the old days tore the whole wall out to find it. Now they can use this. Oh, it's right at this location. Go right in and get it. Saves a lot of damage in the property. But the range of equipment, even just the turnout suits that they wear for protective gear, those wear out in training and in use. And all of the equipment has to get replenished. Fire trucks are great. They have a 20 to 30-year life, but they have to be replaced. So if you got 30 stations, 30 years, you got to buy 1 new truck a year.
Some of the grants you get, are they coming from corporate or other foundations? Well,
our largest source are a couple of individuals and a couple corporations. I'm sure the Red Cross and everybody sees when there's an emergency like we've had in 03 and 07, donation levels rise way up. And in between, it's, public safety kind of gets put to the background and the donations are lower. So, we did over $1 million in grants after the last set of big fires. Now we're running $200,000 to $300,000 a year, but the requests are far greater than that. The needs are far greater. Part of our outreach will be to individuals and corporations to step up to the plate and provide some additional funding. But we also, on our website, www.sdfirefoundation.org, have the ability for the average citizen to make smaller contributions online, or if they're uncomfortable using online or new technology, there, our address is there. They can certainly mail a check in. And what we do is we take all of these funds and build it up, and then we do our grant program and take the highest priority ones and get them filled.
Well, I certainly hope people head to the website. That's sdfirefoundation.org, not only to donate. There's a lot of interesting material there. There's a lot of video. You can find out some very interesting stories about the people who are the volunteer firefighters in our East County and the EMTs. There's a lot of things to look at there, so I suggest you check that out. Frank Ault, chairman of the board of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. Joan Jones, the executive director of the San Diego Regional Fire Foundation. They've been around since 1989, and hopefully their work will continue on, bringing help to those who are fighting fires and taking care of those who are injured or sick on an emergency basis out in the East County. I appreciate both of you tonight joining me on Community Connection. I'm Mark Zegan. Thanks again for joining me.